Hi, I'm Ákos, and I usually talk about Docker, but this time I want to show you something more. I want to teach you something more. For example, what if you are a developer and you want to test your application, but you don't have the infrastructure? Or what if you are just trying to learn about networking, but you don't have the infrastructure, and for obvious reasons, you don't want to test networking on your local machine because you don't want to break it. And sometimes you just want to try an application that requires something like Kubernetes, so you need Kubernetes, of course, and sometimes for that you also need multiple machines. Now, you can also use something like Docker Desktop and run a single node Kubernetes cluster, but sometimes the application itself requires you to have multiple machines. So then you can also choose to use multiple physical machines, or you can also run virtual machines. Even if you want to run everything on a physical machine, you very frequently need to reconfigure it because sometimes you want to test an application which requires a different kind of configuration. And if you want to run virtual machines, then you probably want to remove those virtual machines and create them again. So you can do it manually, or you can also find a tool which helps you not to make so many mistakes. And I will talk about Ansible, but this is not the only tool that you can choose. So if you want to learn more, then you can search for infrastructure as code and you will find other tools as well. Now, the main purpose of my video, and hopefully in the future a series of videos, is that I can show you that you can use cheap devices, your laptop, your PC, obviously if you have enough resources, but you can use those to create a local infrastructure, a local test environment where you can try and you can learn about things that you couldn't use without that infrastructure. And you can also go to the cloud and pay for a service or something. But if you want to choose something cheaper, then your local laptop and your PC will be enough. As you can see on the screen, I already have a project and I call it Personal Swiss Army Knife because this is how I store everything that I learn. If I find out how I can install Docker using Ansible, then I create a role and I will talk about roles later. I can also use Ansible to install virtual machines or run Kubernetes clusters or even Docker Swarm clusters. And I can also configure NetPlan so I can use it for networking as well. I also have a documentation. This is here in the code. I use Sphinx, which is to generate the documentation written in restructured text format. And how it looks like, you can see it here. I used an existing theme for this documentation and I needed to modify it a little. I have some useful comments here and I have many things about containerization. So if you keep watching me, you can learn about many things. And as you could see, we can also talk about networking and virtual machines and probably monitoring and file systems. Now, I'm not a networking guy, so if you really want to focus on networking, then you probably need to find other books and other videos as well. And I also don't promise to tell you everything about production systems because this is mainly for development purposes. If you want to work on a project in a production environment, then you need to learn more about security and to create backups and so on. On the other hand, if you need a way to install your local environment and to test your applications, then this video is for you. So stay with me and I will show you everything that I know. Now it's time to work with Ansible, and the first step is installing Ansible. Since I don't like to install Ansible globally, because some of my projects will require an older version of Ansible and other projects may require newer versions of Ansible, I will try to create a virtual environment and install Ansible inside that virtual Python environment. As you can see, I have a README, which will help me to help you. And the first command which I need to run is this command. If it doesn't work for you, then you can try the other commands as well. This command depends on how you installed Python and the modules which will help you to install virtual environment. So I will use the first command here, and I have another screen to run shell commands. I could use Visual Studio Code to have a terminal as well. I don't want to use that because that is not always the same as my own terminal and doesn't always work properly. Okay, so here I am and I want to run this command using Python 3. And now I will have a virtual environment folder and I need to activate it. So let's do it. Okay, my prompt has changed and I have Ansible, right? No, because I need to install Ansible. It was just a virtual environment. So how can I install Ansible? The next thing we need to do is we will create a requirements txt for Python. And I know I need Ansible core and also Ansible. So if you just want to use the Ansible core, then you can just install Ansible core. And whenever you need a specific module, then you can install that. Now, I don't want any surprise, so I want to install everything that I can. This is how I can do it. I will use and install Ansible core and the Ansible package as well. Okay, the next step is I will use this file to install Ansible, of course. So pip install-r requirements txt. Done. Okay. Now, if you want to, you can also upgrade pip. I will run this command now, but this is not a requirement. So we have Ansible installed, but we don't know which version was installed. So I will run pip freeze here and copy this first two lines into my requirements txt this way. So if I run these commands next time, I will use the same version of Ansible and I will be sure that it will work because I know I tested it. Before I start to talk about Ansible, I want to show you something else, since as you know, I usually talk about Docker. So that would be a good example how Ansible is different. Let's create a simple Docker file and I will remove it later. So I want to create a very simple image using a simple Ubuntu base image. It can be just simply Ubuntu, and I can run an apt get command to update the repositories and also use apt get install to install, for example, nano. Okay, I could run it. I don't want to. This is just an example. So you can see if you want to run a container, you need an image and you can use a Docker file to describe how that image should be created. So sometimes you don't want to use containers and you want to install something on the host or, for example, run virtual machines, create them and remove them. If that happens, then it would be useful if you could have a file where you can describe those instructions. And yes, you could use a shell script, but then you should write every condition that helps you install everything and check if something is already installed or not. And Ansible can do it for you. So I will remove this Docker file. We don't need this now. And we should create that file that describes what we want to run on the remote servers. The problem is, before we can do that, we also need to tell Ansible where we want to run those commands. So I will create an inventory YAML, which is the file we need now. And this file is a list of servers, and I can also define Ansible groups, server groups. I don't want to talk about groups today, so I will just use a special group called all, and it will contain all of my servers. And I can also define variables, which you need to learn because Ansible is very dependent on variables. And the next, which we need to define, is the list of host names. And you need a name. It could be anything, but you can also use your actual host name. If you have a local DNS server and the server is accessible by using the host name, that's fine, and you are done. Or maybe you want to define the IP address, and for that you can use the Ansible host variable. So I will use the IP address, this, and I can also define the username, Ansible user, which is TA, and okay, sometimes Visual Studio Code wants to be too smart. Okay, now I could move this variable definition from here under the var section here. And you can do it because sometimes you want to define one username for multiple servers. You can just keep it here and define for each server in the section of the server, or you can just define once and change it for each of the servers at one place. Okay, that's all. And now I should define the password somewhere or have a SSH key. I will get back to it later. Now we need a playbook YAML. As the inventory file was the list of servers, the playbook will be the list of plays. So I need to use this dash to start a list. And the play can have a name, it's optional. And I want to call it play1. Okay, and now I need to tell Ansible on which servers or server groups I want to run my command. So I use the host keyword again, but in this case it is in a playbook, and I can just use all, and now I can define tasks. A task is almost like a command which we want to run on a remote server. It can be more complicated, but let's not talk about that right now. Okay, so I want to choose a name because a task can also have a name. Let's call it Who Am I? And now I need to choose a module name. It is not something that you can just find out. You need to check the documentation to know which modules you can use, and the command is one of those. So in the recent versions of Ansible, I can also use Ansible built-in command because we can also use categories for modules. And again, this is not something I just use because I like to use Ansible.builtin. This is in the documentation, so it wouldn't work with another prefix. Now the command which I want to run is who am I? Now we can try to run this command, this Ansible playbook. And if you want to know why we are defining a list of plays, now I could also say, okay, I want to define another play here, and I want to run these tasks on a different set of servers. For example, I only want to run these on Docker hosts. Since I don't use any other group, I don't want to use any other plate now. So now I can use Ansible playbook and -I to set the inventory file and also the name of the playbook. I can try to run it and you could guess it will not work. It will not work because now I have to somehow set the password as well, or at least an SSH key. Let's first try the password. So I didn't want to set the password in the playbook, I mean in the inventory file, because I didn't want to share my password with you. So I can use the ask password or the ask pass flag of the Ansible playbook, and I can try to run this now and type my password. And again, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the SSH connection with the password requires me to install SSH pass. And the problem is that I cannot install it on my MacBook because it doesn't support it. So now I can try something else. I could now configure my SSH keys, or I can show something else. So if I go back to my README file here, you will see I mentioned Multipass. And Multipass is something that I already mentioned before in my other videos because I sometimes used it to run Docker inside the virtual machine on my macOS, and I can also use it to have a Linux operating system as an Ansible controller. So this is the command that I can use to run a virtual machine, and if you want to know how you can install it, you can just go to the browser and go to multipass.run/install, and you can find it, the installation process for Linux, Windows, and for Mac OS as well. I can mount the folder from the host operating system into the Multipass virtual machine, and then I don't need to copy the source code into the virtual machine. I want to use 2 CPUs and only 2 GB of memory. The name of the virtual machine will be Ansible controller, and I can only use Ubuntu machines, and the version of this will be the latest LTS version. Now I can run it here. Or I could run, but the fact is that I already ran this command, so I have my Ansible controller. I can show you. I have 2 machines, and one is the Ansible controller. So let's ask for a shell, Multipass shell, Ansible controller. And I can go to the projects folder and into the project. And here is everything. You can also notice that now everything is owned by Ubuntu. This is because Multipass maps the usernames, the user IDs, with the username inside virtual machine, and that is good for me. So now I can try to create a new virtual environment here using the previously showed command. So I use the venv module, and obviously I cannot use the same folder that I used before, so I will try to use the venv-linux. It doesn't work because now I didn't install this module. Luckily for us, the shell will tell us how we can install it, so let's just run it, and I need to use sudo. Okay, now finally I have my VM module and run this to have our first virtual environment on Linux. Done. Let's activate it, VM Linux bin, and activate. Okay, and now I can install the requirements, the same requirements, because I have that requirements txt. So let's do it. Now I can run the same command here, Ansible playbook. And again, it will not work because of the same problem. But now I can finally install SSH pass. I can try ask pass again just to show you that we will get the same error message. Yes, we get that. And now I can install it, SSH pass. So try again. Okay, and finally it works. And the problem is that we don't see anything. We just see that the task was executed and we don't see the result. We can fix this. So let's go back to the playbook and we can register a variable and save the result into this variable. So I will use an underscore just because, as I mentioned, variables are very important in Ansible. And there are so many places where you can define variables. And I don't want to accidentally override a variable. So I usually use an underscore at the beginning of the variable if I want to define just a local variable or just a temporary variable. So let's call it output. And the next task can use this output variable. I will call it debug. And the module which I need to use is Ansible built-in debug. And it has parameters. The first is var. It means I can set a variable here which I want to debug. If I want to just debug a message, a string, then I can use msg instead of var. So let's just use the var because I want to know what is in the output variable. So I go back to my terminal and run the same command again. I need to type my password. And as you can see now here, you can find the std out, the output, and it shows my name, my username. If you want to get only this username, you can also do something else. You can say you want to refer to, in the output variable, you want to refer to std out. So let's try again. And now you can finally see this. It wasn't very useful, so let's do something more useful. I want to remove this debug task, and also I want to remove this who am I task. So I will try to create a file with a specific content, and I say create hello world file. And now I will use the built-in copy module and say the content should be hello world and the destination should be, for example, home ta, my username. And I want to create a file called hello world.txt. Let's try to run this again. And now you can see it shows us that it changed. Something has changed on the remote server, and we can check that. Let's open a new terminal. I don't want to close this one. And this is our hello world.txt. If I go back to run the same command again, Ansible will show me that this didn't change anything because previously I've run this same command. So that's it. This is the simplest Ansible configuration that you can try, I think. And the next time, if you keep watching me, I will show you something more.